Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yo, what's good, original crew, man? We back. More Mr. Ballin'. We got top 3 strange but true death story. Ready for this one tonight? You ain't ready for a 3-part series? You ain't ready for a 3-part?
I don't know. Depends on what we talking about, y'all.
Hey, he back on the 3. Mr. Ballin' lately.
Cause
last week was, but the week before was good. Last week was with the truck driver.
Oh yeah.
Not the one we went and got an old joint. Now that was an old joint. That's
that
different.
was old. That was different.
That's different. I'm saying, but the week before that with the woman, with the woman, you know what I'm saying? You still don't remember.
Yeah.
No, you don't. Watch this. She gave her husband some in his drink.
I remember that one. I remember it.
Hey.
I thought it was crazy because you was thinking that I was. No, I was playing.
Well, I cook my own food now. So, with that being said, before we get into it,
crazy,
make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go, man. You want the first part, you got to do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video,
like it with a thumbs up.
The choke out, the choking up. Y'all hear it? Them lies choke you. Yeah. Hey, cook your own food. If you ain't make it, don't touch it. You know what I'm saying? Word to the wise. If you ain't
First of all, stop.
You wasn't there, don't touch it. And then if you step away, don't touch it.
Tell people you just playing, but I be thinking you
I ain't playing. That's some real information.
Yes, you are.
That's some real deal information for a lot of people out here. Like, let's go. You ready?
Sure.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button lets you borrow their favorite book, be sure you spill several cups of water on the pages so it warps the book and it never closes flat again. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications.
I used to hate that when you get that warped book back in school. You remember when they used to give you books at the beginning of the year and you got a book that somebody in the head the year before and they done wet some of the pages and the pages be all crinkled up? She mad at me.
Don't talk to me.
So you don't cold and totally confused. It was September 6th, 2007, and all Carlos could remember was being on his motorcycle with the hot sun bearing down on him as he wound his way on his bike through the streets of La Victoria, which is a city in Venezuela. Carlos tried to open his eyes, but he couldn't, and then when he tried to move his body, he couldn't do that either. And so he began to panic because he's paralyzed, but he told himself to calm down. If he couldn't move, at least he could think. He could try to process, what's going on here. There has to be an explanation for it. And so Carlos, in total darkness and immobile, began going through over and over again this whole motorcycle trip, which was his last memory. And he remembered that his friend had called him up and asked him to go out on this ride. Carlos used to go out all the time on his bike for fun with his friends and by himself, but now that he was 33 years old and married, he didn't have the time for it as much. But the weather had been so beautiful that when his friend had called and asked to go out, Carlos said, let's do it. And so Carlos began going over in his head the route that they had taken through La Victoria, and all he could remember was this long straightaway and then a right turn and then nothing. It was like after he made that turn, everything went blank. And as Carlos thought about how weird it was that 1, he was paralyzed, and 2, he had no memory of what happened after he made that right turn, he started to realize that he felt something against his back. It was like there was a block underneath his back, kind of right between his shoulder blades, propping his chest up, and he felt his arms kind of dangling down by the side, and it was very uncomfortable. And as he laid in this totally awkward position, he began to hear...
He can't be paralyzed, you know what I'm saying, if his arm like this and he can actually feel it, right?
Are you talking to me?
My bad. You were something else.
No, it's just like
Extra childish.
Just petty. But
petty is childish. But
I'm just playing. I'm not either one, but I'm just playing. But maybe
stiffness.
I don't know. Maybe it was just or just because if he moved his arms, unless he paralyzed from.
Or you just been unconscious for a long time and you trying to regain you.
Yeah, or they just feel heavy or numb or
you
something.
Just can't feel it because, you know.
Yeah, I don't know, child.
I already know where my mind's going.
It was very uncomfortable. And as he laid in this totally awkward position, he began to hear somewhere out in the ether unfamiliar voices just kind of chatting. And immediately Carlos is like, okay, someone's here to help me. I don't know what's wrong with me, but somebody's here. I'm going to be okay. And soon, whoever was talking near Carlos had moved closer to him. And actually, Carlos began to realize that it was actually more than one person. It was at least two people talking back and forth. But again, Carlos can't open his eyes. He can't move. He can't communicate with these people. He just knows they've come closer to him. And after these people had moved right up against Carlos suddenly felt something metal pressing up against his chin. And it was kind of sharp, and it kind of hurt when it touched his chin. And Carlos wanted to scream out and tell them whatever they were doing to stop and at least tell him what was going on. But Carlos couldn't make a sound. And then Carlos began to hear this kind of mechanical whirring sound, like a machine starting up that was very close to where he was. And suddenly Carlos began panicking, like, what's going on? What are they doing to me? And as Carlos's heart rate is starting to speed up, one of the people who had moved near Carlos suddenly said, oh my God, that's impossible. This can't be. And then again, Carlos felt more pain in his chin. And then the pain got dramatically worse. It went from just kind of like a poking feeling to something going into his chin, and he felt it moving underneath his skin like a knife cutting through him. And then whatever it was, it went out of his chin. And as this is happening, Carlos is trying so hard to just wake himself up and do something to tell these people to stop, but he just couldn't do it. And then again, he felt that sharp pain in his chin. Another round of something going into him, moving underneath his skin and then poking out again. And the pain became so blinding that suddenly Carlos was able to kind of break through this paralysis and his eyes shot open. And for a second, all Carlos could see was like blinding lights. But then as things came into focus, he saw there were two people, the people who had been speaking, wearing these huge goggles and face masks. And one of them was holding a big needle with black thread attached to it. And that thread was coming from Carlos's chin. They had been running that needle through his face, stitching his chin for some reason, but with no anesthetic. And so as Carlos is staring up at these people in goggles, the people in goggles are looking down at Carlos and they're totally horrified. And they just kind of begin backing up, not really sure what to make of this. And then Carlos, again, kind of breaking through this weird paralysis he was under, he was able to lift his head up and look down at his body. And he saw, to his horror, that he was totally nude. He was laying on a metal table, and there was this Y drawn on his chest, starting at his collarbones, coming down right underneath his throat, and then straight down across his chest. And then after Carlos saw this Y on his naked body, he looked over at a tray that was right next to this metal table near these two guys in goggles who were now kind of backing up. And he saw there was a whirring instrument on this table, and it was a circular blade, a saw. That was the sound he heard. And that's when Carlos figured it out. Earlier that day, when Carlos had been out riding his motorcycle with his friend, he had gone down that long straightaway in La Victoria. He had made a right turn and parked illegally. Right after this turn was this big truck. Carlos didn't see it, and at full speed, he impacted the truck. He was thrown from his bike, smashed into the ground, horrific injuries. And when paramedics showed up, they pronounced him dead on the scene. And so he was moved from the scene of the accident to the morgue. And at the morgue, Carlos was stripped naked and put on this metal table, and they placed a block underneath his shoulders, kind of propping his chest up, and they drew a Y down the center of his chest for his autopsy. The two doctors that Carlos ultimately saw chatting and performing this autopsy were going to follow that Y on his body with the circular saw. That's how they cut you open during an autopsy. But right before they were about to do that, the doctors noticed that Carlos was actively bleeding from his chin. And since he was supposed to be dead, that didn't make any sense. And so that was why one of the doctors had said, oh my goodness, this can't be. And so not really sure what to make of it, they had just grabbed a needle and begun stitching his face together to stop the blood from going down his chest. And then Carlos opened his eyes, and it dawned on the two doctors that, oh, he's alive. That's why he's still bleeding. We should definitely take care of him now. But amazingly, after Carlos came back from the dead, he was simply moved into the hallway and left on this metal table, and the doctors who were going to perform his autopsy just left the paper that said he needed an autopsy in his pocket, just kind of showing that, hey, we were just following orders. Somebody told us to give you an autopsy. This is not our fault.
Wow.
And that's where Carlos stayed until his wife showed up and found him in the hallway, just laying there as if he was still just waiting for his autopsy. Wow. Carlos would suffer horrible injuries from the accident and serious emotional trauma from almost being cut open during this autopsy, but he would make a full recovery.
That's what's up.
That's the reason why
crazy.
I be like, dog, like, you know how back in the day, like olden times, like when they used to bury people, they didn't do autopsies and remove organs of the body and stuff because of lack of medicational studies or lack of this, like, you know what I'm saying? So they used to bury people in boxes or just in shallow graves, and then they'll put a bale and put a cord just in case if that person wakes up, they can be able to ring the bell, you know what I'm saying? Because they 100% can determine if you were dead or not. And there's been a lot of cases where people have been presumed deceased and they are actually not deceased. And a lot of people have woken up at their funerals. A lot of some people have woken up right before they went in the ground. Some people have woke up in the ground. They have even said there have been times where they have went and dug up bodies, and when they have dug up the caskets, they have seen where people have scratched at the casket trying to get out because y'all have buried them and they're still alive. So, with that being said, even doing autopsies, it's not 100% proof that a lot of people be passed away.
Facts. And my bad, go ahead.
No, I was just finna say, you know how many people possibly wasn't deceased, and we have done autopsy, removed organs, and did all that, and voila.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I was just about to ask, did they say how long he had been in the morgue? Like,
it happened that day.
Like, so they did everything that same day?
Yeah.
Oh, because I was about to say, like...
He said earlier that day he was on it.
Okay. I was like, because maybe I missed it or kind of was just like... Because I already knew kind of where it was going anyway. But,
I knew from the beginning. When I told you, I said, oh, he wasn't...
Yeah. But I'm like... And then with y'all being doctors and him, like, actively bleeding, that should have been a sign there that, oh... something is, you know what I'm saying? Like, even though y'all was like, that can't be, but that should have been like, wait a minute, how, if he's deceased, how is he, you know, actively still, like...
Because somebody probably said he's brain dead, so his organs probably still... I don't know how that works. I don't know how that works,
but anyway, yeah.
But also, they took me back to, I don't know what show, I think he was watching the show, but I can't remember what show it was. Dude was laying on the hospital, not in the hospital, but at the morgue.
Okay.
He was on the table. They were getting ready, and he knows that he goes through this point where he's in and out of consciousness, and where like he becomes nonverbal. He can open his eye. He can't move, but he knows he's not. And it seemed like his heart has stopped, but he has a low, faint pulse. But to the average person, you won't feel a pulse. But he's still alive. He had some kind of condition. It was on a show. But it was like this actually happens in real life where people will seem like they have deceased. And if you don't know about the disease, you will, or know about whatever illness they have, you would think they have died.
Yeah.
But they're not dead. And and then he woke up on the table, and he was ended up waking up right before they did the autopsy. And
I can't remember.
He was just kept talking. He was like, "Please don't, please don't."
Yeah.
And I can't remember what show it is. It's one of them shows, but I cannot remember. But I knew how this was going to end.
Yeah.
This is horrible, man.
On the afternoon of May 11th, 2015, 55-year-old Natalia was gathering sap inside of a Russian forest with her 82-year-old friend, Valia. The two of them had been coming to this grove of birch trees for many years. They enjoyed the peace and solitude of nature, and it was also a good place for Natalia to bring her little dog so he could run around while they collected the sap. It was a perfect spring day. The weather was very mild, the sun was out, and the two friends had a great time just kind of moving around the different birch trees, using their little drills and hammers to get their taps into the tree, and then they'd put their glass bottles underneath each tap to collect their harvest. And then at some point, Natalia felt like she had all the sap she would need, and she began gathering up her things to get ready to leave. And as she did that, she looked over at Valia, and she had found this really big birch tree, and she had sat down underneath it and was working hard to set her tap. And so as Natalia registered that Valia was over here, kind of doing one more tree before they left, she began looking around for her dog. And she found her dog, and he wasn't too far away from Valia, and he was just kind of moseying around one of the trees, when suddenly Natalia noticed the dog came to a hard stop, and it turned and looked deeper into the forest, like it had clearly registered something that had put it on alert that was out of view. And so Natalia, her view was obscured from whatever the dog was looking at, and so she put down her equipment and kind of moved between the trees to see what her dog was looking at. And at some point, her view cleared, and she saw pretty far off in the forest was something huge, this dark thing kind of moving behind the trees. And suddenly, it jumped out from behind the trees and ran towards the dog. It was a huge Russian brown bear. And so totally horrified, Natalia's watching this bear charge her dog. She looks over, she sees Valia, who's pretty hard of hearing, is sitting with her back to this bear and the dog, still just working on this tree. And Natalia's just frozen for a moment, having no idea what to do. And then instinct suddenly took over, and Natalia just turned and began running away, leaving Valia and leaving the dog. But after only running several paces, she stopped and turned around and saw the bear is still trying to attack the dog, but the dog is...
You leaving your dog?
Hell no, I ain't leaving my baby.
I ain't gonna hold you. Sometimes you just gotta say, hey.
You leaving the dog?
Yeah, I might have to leave the dog in that situation.
I'm not leaving my baby, babe.
I'll tell him come on and like let it roll.
And I'm gonna try to do something, but I'm not just gonna leave him. No.
But I'm not finna go in contact with the bear try to save the dog.
First of all, I'm gonna judge and see.
But then now, as if I try to confront the confront the bear to try to save the dog, now me and the dog is his food. So
well, I'm trying to think. I'm like, how far is the bear from the dog? First,
come on, let's go.
Let's go. Yeah, come on, let's go. Like, come on, please, come on. Like, don't make me have to make this decision. Like, I don't know. That's my baby. I can't do that.
Standing its ground and barking at the bear, which is kind of causing it to back up and be a little unsure of itself, even though this dog is so much smaller. And still Valia is not reacting at all. She has not heard the bear, the dog, nothing. And Natalia, she's looking back, knowing that she needs to do something. She can't just let her friend and her dog get killed. And so Natalia began walking slowly back in the direction of this bear, and she began screaming at Valia to get up and run with her. But the second Natalia began screaming, the bear went from looking at the dog to turning and looking at Natalia, and suddenly it was like the dog meant nothing. The bear had decided it was going to go after Natalia. And so Natalia, she's staring at this bear, realizing, oh my God, it's going to charge me. Yeah. But before she could even turn to run, the bear had ran at full speed and jumped at her. Natalia turned and she tried to run, but the bear bit down on her thigh, and she felt it crush her leg and pull her to the ground and whip her up against a nearby birch tree, and she's screaming and trying to pull herself herself away, but the bear is ripping at her leg, trying to yank her back into the forest. And then Natalia, she sees her little drill that she uses to set the tap in the trees, and she reaches out and she grabs it, and she turns, and her leg is being actively eaten by this bear. And she turns on the drill, and she's about to jam it into the bear's eye when the bear suddenly stands up to its full height and then just falls all its weight down onto Natalia's chest. And immediately Natalia dropped the drill and the bear clenched down on her throat. Now at this point, Valia, who again is hard of hearing, she didn't know what was going on.
You see why I said sometimes you just gotta...
Now, look.
Now you are the fool because you trying to go save everybody else.
I ain't just gonna leave my folks out there now, but
I ain't finna
damn,
get aid
bitch,
for nobody.
listen, look, where your little hearing aid at?
Where your antennas at?
Like you need a little hearing aid or
If
something.
you hard of hearing, pay attention to your surroundings at all times.
What you said?
Man, look up.
Every blue moon, you need to
every
look,
10 seconds, look up.
you need to be looking around. I'm sorry. Hard decision.
She turned around and saw this bear mauling her friend. And so what does she do? She runs over to this bear right behind it and begins pummeling this bear and screaming at it to get off her friend. And the bear, who barely registers Valia hitting it, it just lets go of Natalia for a second. It turns around, and you got to remember, this bear has been eating Natalia. Its face is covered in her blood. And it turns and looks at Valia, and Valia, she's terrified. She begins stumbling backwards, and the bear is clearly about to jump on Valia when Natalia, who's barely alive, she sees this happening, and she just begins screaming at this bear while she's laying there bleeding out, trying to attract the bear to come back and keep eating her to spare Valia. And it works. The bear, hearing Natalia screaming behind it, forgets about Valia and turns back around and resumes eating Natalia. And then just seconds later, the bear actually lifted up Natalia by her neck and it ran off into the woods carrying her. And so Valia is just left watching this happen. She knows she's not going to be able to stop this bear. And so she just begins running back towards the car, which was not that far from where they were. And when she got out there, she grabbed her phone and she called the authorities. About an hour and a half later, hunters sent by the police, along with animal control, arrived at this parking lot and they found Valia, who was totally in shock, and she would tell the hunters and animal control where this birch tree grove was, where all this happened, and a moment later, the authorities headed into the woods. And after arriving at the birch tree grove, they actually saw the bear. It was by itself, and it turned and looked at them, and it began charging them, and they all raised their rifles, and they fired at the bear. And they shot it enough times that the bear collapsed right in front of them, and then they shot it one more time to make sure the bear was dead. But there was no sign of Natalia anywhere. But then suddenly, the authorities turned and saw something move off in the distance, and out from behind a tree came Natalia's little dog. It had somehow not sustained any injuries from this bear, even though the bear had originally gone after the dog. And the dog, it came up to the authorities and then quickly doubled back behind a tree. And so, kind of operating on instinct, the group followed the dog around the tree, and they saw the dog was closely guarding this kind of mound that was covered in sticks and leaves and dirt. And so one of the hunters walked over and looked down, and they realized there was a person underneath this mound. It was Natalia. They pulled off all of the dirt and the twigs, and they found her absolutely destroyed, mauled body. But Natalia was actually still alive. Brown bears are notorious for eating their prey while they are still alive. And in many cases, they will gravely wound their prey, but not let it die, because then the meat is fresher when they come back and eat it later. And so bears will wound their prey and then basically bury them, cover them up with sticks and dirt, kind of like putting it in the fridge, and then come back and eat them later on. And so Natalia was earmarked to be eaten later because she was still alive and buried. Natalia was rushed out of the forest to a nearby hospital, and she would stay there for several weeks because she had serious injuries from this bear. All over her body were these huge bite marks, and a lot of the flesh from her leg had been pulled off. But amazingly, she would recover, although the trauma of nearly being eaten by a bear has never left her.
Yo,
I'll be traumatized for the rest of my life.
but shout out to her, bro.
Shout out.
She's been a super friend.
Fact, she literally sacrificed herself.
Like, she put her life on the line for someone else. And a lot of people wouldn't do it. I ain't gonna hold you. I said it, even though jokingly and like out of reality of the fact, I would have still tried, you know what I'm saying, tried to get her attention some type of way, but I don't think I would have had the courage to try to come in contact. Well, she didn't either.
She didn't either. She was just trying to yell and and he was like, "Oh,
you making the loudest noise.
Okay, you my target."
Yeah, so because the dog was making the most noise at first.
Yeah.
And then, you know, he's like, all right, now my attention is off the dog because now you're louder than the dog. So you're seeing the more aggressor than a dog. The dog is not a threat. Because I wonder why the bear didn't go after the dog at all, you know?
I mean, first of all, I don't know. Especially since, I don't know. Maybe it was because she was coming
No,
at him
I ain't
loud.
talking about that. I'm talking about before all of that.
All of that.
You know, even after the fact, because I know the dog followed them. The dog had to follow because I say this, the most loyal person or the most loyal being in earth will always be your pet. Especially a dog. It's just something about a dog with its companionship to its owner. It will never, if the owner is down and out, it's never going to leave the owner's side. Yeah. It's been cases where a dog has, say for instance, the owner has died in a house. The dog will not eat, it will not drink, it will lay there and die alongside the owner because they refused, you know what I'm saying? That's the reason why it's cases where the dogs is so loyal to the human being where you can be gone for 5 years, you come back, the dog recognize your scent. And and it's like something, a triggering factor. They automatically get happy, you know what I'm saying? But shout out to the dog because if it wasn't for the dog, I doubt they would even found her.
No.
Because the dog was able to show them where she was.
I don't think so. They maybe would have tried to look for her. They possibly would
have. Possibly. But she was under stuff.
Yeah.
And down underneath the mound too. So, like technically in the hiding area. Because basically the bear wanted to hide his food and basically hide it so nobody else can come get it and keep covering it up. But he was going to remember to come back and get it. So, but crazy. Shout out, that's strength.
Facts.
That's strength. That's a whole different type of level of strength you have to have.
Courage.
Yeah, man. It's crazy.
On the afternoon of May 25th, 2017, 42-year-old Nicole Gordon was laying on her couch in her home in Atlanta, Georgia, with an ice pack on her head. She had a blinding headache, one of the worst headaches she had ever had, and she was just unable to do anything else but lay on the couch. Nicole really had no idea why she had this terrible headache. The only thing she could think of was 3 weeks earlier, she had been in a minor car accident and one of her car windows had broken and some of the glass had cut her face, but she didn't think that would be enough to lead to this absolutely horrific headache that had not gone away for 3 weeks. But Nicole was a very tough woman, and even though she had thought about going to the hospital over these past 3 weeks to deal with whatever was causing this headache, she had told herself that, you know, it's got to be something minor. I just need to kind of tough it out here. And what toughing it out looked like was laying on the couch all day long, only getting up to eat and go to the bathroom, not going to work, and just sitting in the darkness with this ice pack, just hoping for this headache to go away. And so as Nicole was just laying there, she heard her back door open up. It was her boyfriend, Durante, coming in with groceries. He came inside and he put the groceries away, and then he came into the living room where she was, and he asked how she was doing. And she told him that the headache had not gone away yet, and would he mind going into the kitchen and getting her some ibuprofen, which are pain meds, as well as some water. And so Durante said, of course. He went in the kitchen, he got what she needed, he brought it back. She said thank you, she took the ibuprofen, and then she went back to just being totally miserable. But just a second later, Nicole and Durante heard a knock at the front door, and Durante, he walked over and kind of casually looked through the blinds to see if he could see who was at the front door, and he saw it was Nicole's best friend, Leisha. But instead of going to the door and opening it, Durante turned to Nicole and said, hey, "It's Leisha, do you want me to get the door?" And Nicole, she just kind of grunted and said, "No, please just ignore her." Even though Nicole and Leisha were very close, Nicole knew that Leisha was very high energy. She had been calling and texting basically nonstop ever since Nicole had begun getting these headaches. Leisha just wanted to help and kind of be around and be a part of her recovery, but Nicole just couldn't deal with that super high energy right now. She could barely have a conversation without her head hurting even more. And she knew that Leisha and Durante didn't really get along too well. And so Nicole figured it would just be better for everybody if they pretended no one was home and Leisha just went on her merry way. But Leisha was very persistent and just continued knocking really loud on the front door. She began calling Nicole's phone, and so Nicole began reaching over and silencing her phone over and over again. And finally, Nicole looked over at Durante and just said, "I don't need this. I'm going into my bedroom and I'm lying down." And so she grabbed her phone, she stood up off the couch, she could barely move, her head hurt so bad, and she walked, quietly past the front door, made her way into her bedroom, and she was about to lay down on the bed when she made the mistake of opening up her blinds just a little bit. Her room was on the front of the house as well, and she wanted to see if Leisha was still there, and when she opened those blinds, Leisha, who was outside, happened to be looking at Nicole's bedroom, and the two of them made eye contact. And Nicole's like, "Oh my God, she knows I'm here." And so Nicole, she just shuts the blinds. But now Leisha comes up to the window and she's yelling, "Nicole, I know you're there. Come on, let me in. I want to help you." But Nicole, she just could not deal with it. And so she laid down on her bed and just continued to totally ignore Leisha. Nicole knew that no matter how offended and upset Leisha was for this snub, she would get over it because the two women had been friends for nearly 2 decades. 19 years earlier, they had been neighbors, and they had become friends really quickly. They had been pregnant at the same time, and they began raising their kids kind of like side by side. But in the last 5 years that Nicole and Durante had been together, Nicole and Leisha had kind of drifted apart because Leisha and Durante both had very strong personalities and they just kind of clashed. And Nicole and Durante had this kind of on-again, off-again relationship, and every time they were broken up, Leisha would come around and be totally unfiltered with Nicole about how much she didn't like Durante. But right now, Nicole could just not deal with Leisha, and so despite hearing her yelling for her to come outside, "Come on, I know you're in there," Nicole just rolled over on her bed with her ice pack on the side of her head, and she fell asleep. A few hours later, when Nicole woke up, Leisha was gone, as well as Durante. He didn't stick around for very long. He often would only come over just to check in, and then he'd go off and do his own thing. And so Nicole, who still had this blinding headache, she sat up, she got out of her bed, and she was only able to walk back out into the living room, where she laid down on the couch and just went right back to sleep. Even though Nicole had had this headache for 3 weeks and it had not gotten any better, she really was convinced that taking enough ibuprofen and relaxing long enough would cause it to go away. But over the next couple of days, this headache, which was already like a 10 out of 10 on the pain scale to Nicole, somehow became like a 20 out of 10, and it got so bad that she couldn't even open her eyes. It was like horrific. And as this headache got so bad, her relationship with Durante started to sour.
Why you just didn't go to the hospital and have them run a CAT scan? I could have seen some, possibly. You know what I'm saying? If you're having a major headache like that. But I understand that costs money, and, a lot of people possibly don't have insurance to be able to cover that. That's a high expense out of pocket, possibly. You know what I'm saying? Even if you have insurance, sometimes insurance only covers so much, and people still financially, want to, So a lot of times with a headache, most people, I'm just pop some Tylenol. But when it's going on for that long, you need to actually go to the hospital. You know what I'm saying?
After a few days, I would have been like, okay.
Facts, man.
Yeah. But everyone's different, and people feel like, I can deal with it. They're paid,
But if once you get to a headache where you barely can open your eyes, you actually, you had those.
Yeah.
And you had to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think a lot of times yours was like, whatever. This ain't about us, but let's go back.
Durante didn't really believe that Nicole was actually in the amount of pain that she was in, and he kind of began acting like she was just being lazy. And this really upset Nicole because that wasn't true at all. She was just in blinding pain and couldn't do anything. Finally, in late June, so 5 weeks after Nicole's headaches had begun, and at this point, her headache had still not gone away, she was laying on the couch, like always, with the lights off, she's got the ice pack on her head, and she's just trying to get through the day when she hears the back door open, and it's Durante, And he comes in, he slams the back door, he doesn't even say hello, and he just storms into the living room and just looks down at her with a totally disapproving look. And Nicole, she kind of looked over at him, and when she saw that look on his face, she had just had it, and she said, you know what? We're done. And immediately Geronte got so mad, and he's like, how dare you? I've been taking care of you for the past 5 weeks, bringing you groceries, this and that. And Nicole, she had no energy to fight with him, and so she just let him rant and rave until finally he was done, and he walked out, and she was like, thank goodness. A few days later, on June 25th, Leisha was back at Nicole's house, knocking on the door. Nicole had actually texted her to let her know that she had officially ended things with Geronte, and so feel free to come over. You know, there's not going to be any drama with him being here. And so Leisha had come back over. She was very excited to see Nicole and kind of get over the snafu of her being ignored. And when she knocked, Nicole did go up to the door and she opened it up. And Leisha, as soon as she saw Nicole, this is like the first time she's seeing her since Nicole's headaches had really begun, she knew something was definitely wrong with Nicole. Her entire apartment is totally dark, all the windows are covered up, and Nicole is squinting out at Leisha, kind of beckoning her to come inside. And Leisha's like, oh my gosh, like how bad is this headache? And Nicole could barely make a sentence, and she just said, oh, it's so bad, it's so bad. And so Leisha came inside, and Nicole led her through the dark apartment to the kitchen and back. And Nicole, she sat down, and Leisha sat down opposite her. And Leisha began asking Nicole questions about her headache, about Geronte, just kind of about her life. And quickly, Leisha realized that Nicole really wasn't making any sense. Her answers, even to the simplest questions like, what did you eat today, were in fragments and didn't really make any sense. And finally, Leisha said to Nicole, hey, this can't be a normal headache. This is something serious. You need to go to the hospital. And at this point, even though Nicole had been trying so hard to just kind of white knuckle her way through whatever was going on in hopes it would go away, you know, she was starting to realize that there was something wrong here and she needed help from a doctor. And so Nicole agreed to go. And so Leisha would help Nicole up and kind of assist her out of the apartment and into Leisha's car, and Leisha would take her to the hospital. And when they got there, Leisha brought Nicole into the emergency room, and she explained to the nurses and doctors that Nicole had this terrible migraine. It started after she was in this minor car accident 5 weeks earlier. And so the doctors and nurses brought Nicole back to one of the rooms, and they began kind of treating her the way they would any other patient who had a serious headache. They asked her if she was hydrated. They asked what medication she was taking. They asked her what she was eating, how much sleep she was getting. They were just kind of going down the list of different things that could cause this headache, but nothing stood out as a red flag. Even the fact that she had been in this minor car accident and had some cuts on her face from the glass, that really wasn't enough for them to think, oh yeah, that would cause 5 weeks of a persistent migraine-like headache. They even looked at the cuts on her face to see if maybe they were infected or something, but they weren't. Basically, they had no idea what was causing this. But the doctors and nurses were very concerned because persistent, extreme pain in your head could be signs of a stroke or an aneurysm or something, both of which can be fatal. So they put Nicole through a series of imaging scans to get a look inside of her head to try to figure out what was going on. And after they finished all these scans, Nicole was brought back to her hospital room and she laid down on the bed. And even though she felt terrible still because of this headache, she at least felt like, okay, finally, you know, these people are going to figure out what's wrong with me. They're going to give me medication. This headache's going to go away and I can get back to my normal life. But only a few minutes later, as Nicole is laying there trying to get comfortable, the door to her room suddenly burst open and a swarm of people came into the room looking very concerned. And in the middle of all these people was a guy wearing a suit, and he walked up to Nicole and he said he was a police detective, and he held up one of her scans and he pointed at it. But
Don't tell me she got a bullet in her head. Or something like that.
Have you heard of stories
Yeah,
like that?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because the photo he kept showing of Geronte looked like a mugshot.
It did, didn't it?
Hold on.
It did look like one. But I was like, where would he have shot her? Not shot her because I wasn't thinking that at first. But when would he have done something to her?
Because now my mind's like...
But then, why would you do something and then be mad, tell her she lazy and don't want to do nothing?
Because he probably just trying to make sure, like, nothing, like, You know how
Okay,
some
let's
people.
not.
But you know how some people, whatever has happened to
Yeah.
her, some people try to stay close to,
Yeah,
so they can see what happens, so he can kind of get
That's-
eliminated from. The,
Okay, yeah, I didn't want to jump to nothing, but
Said he was a police detective, and he held up one of her scans and he pointed at it. But to understand what he was pointing at on her scan, we need to go back and look at what really happened on the day that Nicole got into that minor car accident. Back in early May of 2017, Nicole and Durante, who were still dating at this point, had just come back to Nicole's house after the two of them had been at a house party together. And Nicole was furious with Durante because at this house party, he had been openly flirting with another woman right in front of Nicole. And so Nicole, after going into her house, brought it up to Durante about how disrespectful that was. And Durante, instead of being apologetic or trying to defend himself or even lie about it, he actually just got really mad at Nicole and said, you know what, fine, I'm breaking up with you. And then he began going around her house, gathering up all of his things that he had left inside of her house. And Nicole, truthfully, was so mad that she didn't really care that he was putting on this show of taking his stuff and leaving her. And so after a few minutes of Durante angrily grabbing his stuff from inside the house, he headed outside to Nicole's car where he had some more things inside of her car. And so he went in the passenger seat, and Nicole, she just reflexively got into the driver's seat of the car just to make sure that Durante didn't take anything inside of her car that he shouldn't, or mess with her car in some way to get revenge on her. And so she's sitting there, she's watching Durante right next to her gather up his things, and then he hops out of the car, doesn't say a word to her, and then he walked around the front of her car and got into his car, which was parked right in front of hers, facing out towards the road. He climbed into the driver's seat, shut the door, and then he didn't move. And so Nicole, she's still sitting in her car, looking at Durante, hoping that he's just going to leave now, but he wasn't. And so suddenly feeling so frustrated and mad at him for everything, she turned on her car and drove forward, not fast or anything, and bumped intentionally into the back of Durante's car, and then she backed up to where she had been. And after she did that, she stared angrily at Durante, basically being like, what? Like, I want you to leave. Like, get out of here. And Durante, he was furious. And so he threw his car in reverse and he really hit the gas and rammed into the front of Nicole's car. And in fact, he hit her car so hard that her car lurched backwards and smashed into her fence. Now, Nicole's memory only showed her this exchange. She remembered fighting with Durante, him getting his stuff, and then her bumping into him, and then him really hard smashing into her. And so when she thought about the minor accident she had gotten into, this was it. But what Nicole did not know as she was laying in the hospital bed, as this detective is holding up the scan and pointing at it, is there was actually a whole other series of events that played out after Durante backed into her. After Durante backed into Nicole and she smashed into her fence, Durante got out of his car, walked up to Nicole's car, drew a gun, and shot Nicole in the head. That's what happened. This was not a glass cut. This mark on her forehead was where the bullet went into her skull. But obviously, this did not kill Nicole. It knocked her unconscious, and Durante picked her up, put her in his car, and drove her to his mother's house, where he told his mother that, oh, Nicole was drunk and she got into a small accident and, she just needs to rest. And so Durante's mom, believing her son, put some Neosporin on Nicole's entry wound from the gunshot, put a Band-Aid over it, and kind of looked after her for the night. And then when Nicole came to, she had no idea what happened. Her memory only existed up until Durante rammed into her.
And the only other memory she knows now is what y'all have told her. Y'all tell her you was in a minor, this is glass. He has a glass club, so she ain't thinking it, but it's a bullet lodged in your head. And that is a, wow, bro. And I told you, I said, I said, don't tell me she got a bullet in it. I've seen so much shit.
When he already said they brought the scan and the detective came, I already knew she had got shot in her head. But I was like, but who would have shot her?
I knew it was him.
But then his thing did look like a mugshot. Every time he kept bringing it up, I was like, why did it like a mugshot?
And he just stayed close to see if she was gonna die. And then if
she remember anything,
or if the bullet ever fall out, then
something.
He was trying to be able to see what goes on. And reason why he was so cool with her breaking up with him, and he was cool with walking out that last time, he was like, hey, you gonna die here anyways, because I'm just waiting for you to die.
And I was also thinking when her friend came,
and I won't be around anymore.
Right, and and then I was also thinking, I'm like, with you being her boyfriend, why wouldn't you have like pushed her more to go to the hospital and get seen about? Because you really care about her. Because you don't give a care.
And the reason why, to be honest, when Ballin first said, well, her friend showed up, and she just like, it wasn't because she had been annoying her. Mm-hmm. It was the fact that my boyfriend here, you my best friend, y'all don't get along. I have a migraine. I ain't trying to hear that shit right now. So I'm going to just ignore her so y'all ain't got to be arguing, bickering, and driving my headache even more. Because her friend probably would have already told her to go to the hospital.
Yeah, most
from the
definitely.
jump. And then Jerome would have been like, nah, she don't need to go to the hospital. I mean, not Jerome. Should have been Jerome. Geronte. I've been saying Jerome this whole time. But Geronte.
I didn't even know.
But Geronte, he probably would have been like, nah, you don't need to go. She don't need. She's just a headache. We don't need that doctor. Right. We don't need that doctor bill. We don't need all this. You know,
that's crazy.
She has a bullet lodged in her head this whole time. And
that's insane. But I figured that though. That's crazy.
No idea what happened. Her memory only existed up until Geronte rammed into her. She didn't remember him getting out and shooting her and all of that. And so when Geronte realized that Nicole didn't know he shot her, he just went along with it and said, oh yeah, you got drunk and, we were fighting a little bit and you got into a small accident and I think the glass fell down and cut your head. That's all that happened. And Nicole believed it. It wasn't until Leisha made Nicole go to the hospital 5 weeks later and they scanned her head that they discovered a bullet lodged in her brain. And so the detective came in the room holding up the scan and he pointed to the bright spot on the scan and that was the bullet. And the doctors and nurses, they told Nicole that we've never seen anything like this, like you should be dead. And also because this has gone untreated for 5 weeks, your body healed around the bullet. Like, we can't even take it out now. Your brain has formed itself around the bullet. And so it will do more damage than good if we try to pull it out. Yeah. And so Nicole would go on to live her life with this bullet in her head, but she never really fully recovered. As for Geronte, the police would very quickly go after him, but he would flee police and evade them for 2 years. Damn. And then finally, when they caught up to him, he was hiding in an attic and there was this whole long standoff, but then finally he would surrender himself and then he would get charged with a host of crimes, many of which he was convicted of. And so ultimately he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's story.
This motherfucker made me mad.
But because a lot of things he was saying, I was like, in that last one, because now thinking about it, I'm thinking about a lot of stuff that, like I told you, my stepbrother got shot in the head. And I will remember he can only, like, every detail, like, literally every detail he remembered. He only remembered to the point where they kicked in the door. Boom. And we was like, you kicked in the door? He was like, yeah, I kicked in the door. But when the story came out, he wasn't the one who actually kicked in the door.
Yeah.
He was behind the person who kicked in the door. And all after that, he didn't remember anything because the first individual who kicked in the door, he got shot. The bullet went through him, through his chest, out of his chest, and my stepbrother was crouched down behind him, and that's the reason why he got penetrated in the head with the bullet. But the bullet, if it had went straight through, he would have died. Yeah. But with this stopping, he was laid on the ground, and also what he told us after that, he remembered being on the ground, and he said while he was laying there, he only saw blood. And only thing he remembered from then until waking up in the hospital is at one point he was crying out for his mama. And he said that's when he blacked out and he don't remember nothing but blackness until he woke up in the hospital a few days later. And then he was known as I think he was missing for a week and a half before we located him. But he was a John Doe in Atlanta. Everything happened in Atlanta. But and the other guy, he ended up dying. They found his body in abandoned car at an apartment complex. They had he was able to walk off from the scene.
Yeah.
My stepbrother laid out in a man's truck because they were trying to break into a house
somebody's house
and rob them, but the dude was sitting in the house and he was able to retell the story more. But he was my stepbrother laid out in the ground. They left him, and the other dude, he was able to get back, but he lost so much blood, he bled out in the car and died instead of them taking to the hospital because it would have been you know what I'm saying. But luckily for him, he was able to go to the hospital that night because the man called the police.
Yeah.
Called the police and they was able to rush him, and they were. It was scary because even when I remember going and seeing him in the hospital because they ended up flying back to the Med in Memphis because so he'd be closer to home. They cut his not the Med but LeBarner because he was still 17, but they cut half of his skull out and had to take part of his brain off so they can remove the bullet. And like they said, her brain has now healed and formed this
5
seal.
weeks. Yeah,
that's a long time.
It's a very long time.
Cause the body works wonders, bro. And eventually, over time, that bullet is gonna slowly move, and it's gonna cause even more damage. But it's gonna, and she's probably still suffering with major migraines to this day. Because there's nothing she can do about it. But over time, hopefully, can it even come out? Cause it's in the skull. Most people out here, it's not in a, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Because I was about to say, I ain't gonna, never mind. But yeah, normally be
what
like,
you about to say?
No, I was about to say, 'cause I had just read something. This dude had a bullet lodged somewhere, but I can't remember where his was lodged.
It was in his arm, I think it came out. Or in his side or something. But it was actually his body, not his.
Who you talking about?
The one you was talking about. We ain't got that much time, but.
Okay. I wasn't talking about who you talking about, because you wouldn't have even seen this to even know who
No, you showed me something the other day. You said it was a post and the guy bullet head finally came out. I can't remember where it came out. And you said you wanted to ask somebody how they bullets ever came out.
Okay. Well, yeah. You said we got a lot of time. So.
No, I was just saying, do you remember now? But like you said, I can't remember where he was.
Yeah. I can't remember. Yeah. Whatever story I'm talking about.
What's in his head?
I don't know. That's why I said I feel like it was, but I can't remember. But his finally came out though. Yeah. Like it's been years.
Yeah, but I wonder if it's didn't penetrate the skull, will it fall out? You get what I mean? If it's in there but not in the actual skull, but if it's in the skull, it has no exit area to come out because the brain is But all these stories crazy, man. But I do pray Nicole is able to go through a full healing process.
Yeah.
That's a traumatic experience that a lot of people can't go through a 100% full healing process because it's just not medical healing. It's now she has to heal through life and get readjusted to a whole new life of hers. But also any time because something can happen. She can fall, the bullet, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's Natalia, again, that's a traumatic experience.
It is, most definitely.
Even Carlos, the first guy.
All of them were. All three of these stories, I'm like, wait, what?
Each story is literally a death story. That's what I guess he called it death's door.
Yeah.
Because any situation could have ended up in death. Carlos, you could have literally, if you didn't wake up when you woke up, you wasn't dead, but you would have been dead. And even with them trying to stitch. And then Natalia, just, oh my, and then Nicole being shot down, bro.
That's just a lot to digest, cause but that's messed up though. All the situations messed up, but that last one,
and
that's
then the fact that
messed up, and then you
punk ass nigga just walking around with you for 5 weeks, and you had the nerve to take you to, and now I kind of got to look at your mom as did you really tell your mom that?
I'm pretty sure he didn't tell his mom.
No, peep this. Did you really tell your mom that? Because you went on a run for 2 years, and so people were hiring you out for 2 years. So it's a
maybe she found that after the fact, probably. But I'm wondering, did she know then when you brought her? I don't know. A bullet wound and a scratch, they do not.
It's a hole.
Anyway,
not a scratch.
let me just mind my business. But I'm glad.
Because you can go deeper into those.
Yeah, I'm glad everybody lived through these situations. They're very traumatic. Yeah. But yeah, that's sad. That's sad. All these are sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so hey, our battery timer thing going out stuff.
Our camera about to die.
Yeah.
So we trying to hurry up. So sorry.
Sorry.
But yeah, come on.
But hey, man, make sure y'all spam us up in the comments, man. Y'all let us know y'all thoughts and opinions down below, man. But as always, I do go by the name of Jimmy Kid. This is
Sierra Nicole.
We are. We out.
Go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my folks. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.